Hello, welcome to another Inside the Birds Chalk Talk special. I'm Geoff Mosher with Adam Caplan, of course, and we're excited to take everyone inside a different part of an NFL franchise. This one doesn't involve scouting or X's and O's or coaching decisions per se. We're really excited to be joined by former Eagles and Chiefs athletic trainer Aaron Borgmann. He's the founder of Borgmann Rehab Solutions in Kansas City, and his podcast partner, Evan Kraft, who is also an athletic trainer for 11 years in the NFL with the Chiefs. And Evan is the director at Milestone Physical Therapy and Training in Greenwood, Indiana. Together, they do the Sports Med Bros podcast, which is available on all podcast platforms weekly. Aaron, Evan, really excited to have you guys. Really excited, Adam and I are, to really get into an area of the Eagles and the NFL that we just haven't had enough opportunity to discuss. And obviously, health, safety, getting guys to be ready on game day. That's your specialties. Knowing injuries is your specialties. And, you know, week to week, this is the biggest thing in the NFL. Who's available, who's not available. And, Aaron, as we start with you and your time with the Eagles, I think the biggest thing I've always wondered that I wanted to ask you about is the Eagles have always put a high priority on how they go about assembling their medical team and treating injuries. And then, they've been sort of, I guess they fashion themselves on the cutting edge of how they practice in relation to the feedback they get from their athletic trainer and medical staff and things like that. So your experience with the Eagles taught you what about them and how they prioritize injuries and medical and athletic training?
Well, yeah. First of all, thanks guys for having us on. We're happy to be here tonight and discuss, kind of what we did in the NFL for 23 combined years now.
Wow.
I think my time with the Birds should be summed up with the following. It was 2006 through 2012. So I was there for 7 seasons before moving on to Kansas City, and Andy Reid was my head coach, right? So it starts there.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think that both Evan and I would say our former boss with the Chiefs, who was my former boss with the Eagles, Rick Burkholder, obviously worked very closely with Andy Reid. And there was a level of trust there, right? Andy Reid decided, like, listen, we're going to take this seriously. And so a lot of credit, I think, starts with him setting the tone for the organization. And you saw that kind of float down not only through him, but with further general managers and the ownership, not only Tom Heckert, Howie Roseman, so on and so forth. It just became pervasive, and it wasn't so much a side piece anymore as it was like, this is a staple of our organization, and here's how we're going to run this. And they've done an excellent job with further head athletic trainers and further medical staffs down the road. And I think that trend continues. So first and foremost, I'd like to give credit to the organization for doing a great job with that. So that's where I'd begin the conversation.
Sports science is a thing I did not hear until, quite frankly, I got to know Chip Kelly a little bit during his time with the Eagles, and
Yeah.
being I'm mostly vegan, so I like to recover. Sleep's important. God, sleep's important. But when did you first learn or hear about sports science? Is it a real thing to you, Evan?
Yeah, it's been a part of our profession for a really long time, and it's really permeated the NFL, and a lot of teams are really focusing on it a lot more just in the advances with technology and everything. So you have a lot of things like blood flow restriction, you have a lot of pneumatic compression devices, you have so many different recovery modalities that are available to these guys. So it's been around for a long time. The technology has just advanced so much, especially with the NFL and the budgets that NFL staffs have. And it's just grown and exploded kind of in our world in the last probably 5 or 6 years. So a lot of teams are really trying to figure out, what can we do to supplement these guys that practice so hard, that play so hard, and figuring out those things. And the science behind it is really evolving as well. So it's really, it's such an advancing thing that we're just trying to keep up with it, and teams are trying to keep up with it. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. It's still evolving. It's going to continue to evolve with technology and research. And it's exploded, like I said. And so I'm curious to see where it goes in the next 10 years, but it's certainly a sect of athletic training encompasses so many things. And like I said, we've been a part of, we kind of have been a little bit of nutrition, a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
recovery, a little bit of sports science, a little bit of mental health. So all of that is kind of evolving into one snowball that's just you know, it's just continuing to grow bigger as we get going down the road here.
Aaron?
And if I could piggyback on Ev's
Yes.
comments, which were really pretty all encompassing, you know, what we've seen in our lifetime and in our time in the NFL is it's gone from the guy that tapes ankles and gives out ice after the game, or girl, as it were, to like these places are healthcare facilities now, right? We can no longer think of this as an adjunct. This is a big part of what we do. And just to add on to what Ev said, you know, things like GPS, you know, catapult testing, where they track your acceleration every practice, they track your mileage every practice. Things like force plate testing in the weight room, where they can see how high and how fast you can jump and what kind of force you land with, and how does that impact your recovery? Does that measure fatigue? You know, all of these things that are just, you know, we've been dealing with them for a while, but they're just kind of becoming in vogue that the outside world kind of knows about them in the media. And it's really important stuff to us. And we don't want anybody to take it to granted that these things don't factor in, because they do, especially in teams that really value the sports science type of thing. I think what you're going to see is that, you know, around the league and throughout sports, different coaches definitely treat it differently. And, you know, there's some that are very analytical about it. Well, what does the science say today? Has this person run too much? Do they have too many miles as a wide receiver? You know, this week, do we need to back down? Do we need to keep pressing? And then there's some more old school people that still like to have a little feel to it, right? And I think we all know who we're talking about, some of the coaches that have been in the league for a while. And so what you're seeing is this blending of everything now. And I think that's where you're finding some really cool stuff with people taking bits and pieces of things and kind of putting them together to create an overall product. Like Ev said, with nutrition, strength and conditioning, mental health, athletic training, physical therapy, you know, all of this plays a role. So, I guess my point being is that we truly ran healthcare facilities as opposed to just being a room in the building.
So that makes me want to ask this question to both of you. Aaron, you can start. You guys are no longer, you're not working for NFL teams right now, right? So let's
Correct.
say you were in 2024, you're working for any NFL team. What do you think would be different about your job now as opposed to when you guys were working for the NFL teams?
Oh gosh, how much time do we have tonight?
Yeah, give me the Cliff Notes version of that.
Yeah,
I
for
guess
sure.
what I'm asking is, what are the biggest changes that you got
Yeah.
that have undertaken?
Yeah, so you know, when I started in the league, and I said this on ours pod a lot, that you know the league was different when I got in 2006. Then it was different than when I changed teams and went to the Chiefs in 2013. Then it was different again when I left the league, and now it's different now that Ev's gotten out, right? And so there's this constant evolution, right? We used to see guys 5 times a day. 5 times a day we would see players, and we still did that at the end of my time, but it was different. It wasn't just, you know, sit on the table and get stuff. It wasn't just slap a modality on somebody and let them sit there and feel it with some ice or some heat. It's active now. It's recovery. It's moving. It's getting in a tub and running. It's, you know, getting in a weight reduced treadmill and moving around. It's getting these guys moving in the right direction, because as you guys know, the time is so limited. And with our knowledge and where we've kind of gone and kind of the sports science stuff that Ev brought up, some of the recovery methods now, we've advanced the profession. And so, you know, I think my answer would be twofold, would be knowledge of how to get from point A to point B, as opposed to just letting healing kind of take its place and the tough guy sucks it up and goes. Now we're combining that with a little bit of science, and you're seeing, you know, that knowledge being used more efficiently to like either rule somebody in or out quicker. No, this guy isn't going to make it. No, this guy is. Let's move on to the next thing. And so I think the process has become a lot more streamlined.
Guys, let's move to some injuries. And the common injury, and this is happening more and more skilled players, but hamstring strains, guys. I think I know injuries pretty well for not being in your profession. You know, I studied injuries. I used to have a website called footballinjuries.com with Jay Glazer. So I study injuries. But my God, I can't figure this epidemic out with hamstring injuries. So Aaron, let's start with you, because you and Geoff contacted you years ago about a player who was taking too long to come back. It was a hamstring strain, right? So what? Obviously, I want to get Evan too, because you both have treated obviously hamstring injuries with NFL players dozens or hundreds of times. How do you treat them? How do you decide if it's a grade 1, 2, or 3? Let's get into all the science of this. And how do you treat these hamstring strains? And by position, sometimes is it longer, shorter? Let's get into that. Let's start with you, Aaron, first.
Well, I'll take the scientific aspect of it, and I'll let Ev kind of handle the back half of this. Hamstring strains can only be graded by MRI, right? Not by X-ray. MRI shows soft tissue. X-ray shows hard tissue. The likelihood is if you or I go out and have a hard workout in the gym or on the bike or on the rower, whatever we do, go for a swim, you go in an MRI tube, you're going to have a grade 1 hamstring because you just have inflammation of the injury. So these if you play a game and you're perfectly healthy and you come off the field, you're probably going to have a grade 1 hamstring because you've used your musculature system, right? And so you're gonna always have that sign of inflammation. Now, when it becomes limiting is the factor, right? So if you have symptoms because of it. Now, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 is all defined by tearing of the muscle. And any kind of a strain is a tear and a tear is a strain. We've heard that over and over again. They're all synonymous. It's just a matter of what degree it is. Now, I am of the mindset that most modern NFL athletes aren't training enough, right? You got to train for the thing that's in there. Now, the CBA would tell you that, and the Players Association will tell you they need to be out of the building more. I think they actually need to be in the building more. I'm a bit of a dinosaur that way because, what we've seen is a reduction in training time, right, outside of the building. And what we always see is these numbers of soft tissue injuries go up early in the season. So I come at it from that part of things. I think you need more exposure and not less to be ready for the rigors of the season. And that's just reps, right? And no, not for nothing, when these guys are off on their own, right, they get to go to wherever they want to go. And I think that's great. I'm not always convinced that these people, A, have the best interest of the player in mind for what the season takes, and B, they darn sure don't have the best interest of the team in mind of what the season takes. So that's a factor. If we got this overlapping Venn diagram, we've got less time in the building, we've got more people, more cooks in the kitchen, we've got a lot of stuff going on. You got every game is now worth more to these players because they're making more money. So that's a factor. There's nutrition involved. Players take care of themselves all differently. I think, listen, we could do a whole episode on this and I'll back away. I will tell you that my personal belief is that you need to treat hamstring strains aggressively, starting week 1 based upon their symptoms and get them moving them as soon as possible. But again, we all do things a little bit differently. I'm going to defer to Ev on the back half of that question.
Yeah, so I'm right there with you. I think it's all about exposure. So Aaron and I have been a part of a head coaching program that's all about exposure in terms of running, in terms of high speed running, in terms of high velocity running. So I think the more exposure you get inside the facility and outside the facility, a lot of times you see these guys go outside the facility and yeah, they've got these highlight videos of them running routes with their trainer, whatever, whoever they're working with the off season, but they're running a route and they're taking 2 or 3 minutes rest, right? So the rest time for a football play is what, 34 seconds. That's not a realistic work capacity, right? So you see these guys do that and then they come to training camp and then they have to go 12 plays in a row where they're resting for 32 seconds and it's just not the same thing. And then that's what spikes these injury rates. That's what spikes these hamstring strains rates. I'm sorry. And even in training camp, and it's, you see these teams that you see all these lower extremity strains in the first couple weeks of the season. Well, they didn't have the work capacity in training camp. So they come out in a game and they're running at game speed and boom, we get a hamstring strain. So is that a correlation? I don't know. Maybe it is. So I think if you build that work capacity, like Aaron said, inside the building, in training camp, if you have a coaching staff that really stresses that, that's one of the keys to preventing those things or reducing those things.
If I go through every starting quarterback for every team over the last 2 years, I think over 75% of them have missed 2 to 4 or more games. Quarterbacks get hurt in the NFL all the time. Is this like is this one of the top issues that when you guys have your conferences or conventions, I mean, is it unavoidable because of the position, or is there more work to be done aside from rule changes that can help quarterbacks stay healthy, or is it just the nature of the game?
There are so many factors differing on the context of those injuries. So
Right. And they're all different types of injuries.
they are. And for a majority of those, I'm going to say it's the nature of the game, man. It's purely the nature of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those guys are a lot more risky than others in terms of running the ball, in terms of getting out of the pocket. So I'm gonna chalk it up to the game, man. It's a physical game. It's a violent game,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes guys just get knocked down, and that's what happens. I mean, there's no way to prevent a guy from diving into another guy's thigh when he's
Right.
running the ball. So it's the
They're
nature of the game.
they're trying hard to figure out ways to prevent it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But I'll let Aaron rant on this one a little bit too.
Well, okay. So listen, if we're going
Mhm.
to talk Eagles, we're going to talk the most mobile quarterback of all time, and that's Michael Vick, right?
Yep.
I had the very good pleasure to work with him for a bunch of years. And granted, he was one of the toughest son of a guns that existed, but he was beat up. He was in the training room a lot, regardless of if he was playing or not. So this isn't a new phenomenon. I would venture to guess, I never got to work with him, but I would venture to guess somebody like Steve Young was the same way. And so, listen, my answer is this. The game has been made faster by athletes. The game has been made faster by rule changes to allow it to be way more wide open, right? There's no more contact at the line for the guys on the outside, the wide receivers, the DBs. So these guys get to run in and they get going wide open spaces a lot farther. So now everybody else has more wide open space to go too. So this is all collateral damage. Like you throw a rock in a pond, these are the ripples that you have to consider, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now your end guys are faster. Now your guys like Chris Jones, Aaron Donald, all these interior linemen are faster than they've ever been and more strong too, right? You're
Yep.
running more out of shotgun. There's no more dropbacks because it used to be if these guys got through the line that they were sacked, 2 yards behind the line. Now it's 7 yards behind the line because there's more wide open spaces. So the game is just played freaking different than it was 5 years ago, even 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The game is just different. And there's nothing wrong with that. But
Mm-hmm.
to Ev's point, you have to understand that there's some, not you, but one has to understand that there's some inherent risk here. And I understand the NFL wants to protect its most valuable properties in the quarterbacks, but injuries are part of the game.
We want to educate people a little bit on this particular question. So, you'll see it reported. Okay, this player, and I get it. Every strain's different. One, two, or three.
You first.
It's very position dependent, obviously. So
Ah,
Nico's a guy, he's a high speed runner. He's got a high rate of deceleration, acceleration. So it's very different. You're going to treat him very different. You're going to return him back to the field very different than you would if it was an offensive or defensive lineman, right? So he's got to gain so much ground when he's running routes, as opposed, no offense to the O&D linemen if they're listening to this. He's got to gain so much more ground. He's got to come out of breaks. He's got to be so much more dynamic than an offensive or defensive lineman who just has somebody leaning on him, right? So sprinting creates a whole different chain of forces on that strain than it does somebody just catching a body or pushing against somebody. Not to say it doesn't hurt, because it does. It's not an easy injury to come back from, but a receiver or a skill position player is a totally different ball of wax in terms of rehab and return to the field than an offensive or defensive lineman.
It's interesting now because before this short-term IR was implemented, right? You obviously didn't put a hamstring on season-ending IR, but now what we're seeing, and I actually used the case of Nico Collins to demonstrate this, that is if a guy has a grade 2, probably they're just saying screw it, putting him on 4-week
Yeah.
IR because especially at a skill position, we know that he's going to take 2+ weeks probably. And so we're going to get that roster spot. And so now what you see is a whole nother level of team management involved in this now.
Real quick, what are you guys talking about on the next Sports Med Bros podcast?
We do social sports med post of the week. So we examine all the different things we see on social media from a sports medicine standpoint, and then
Right.
injuries of the week, and then
Ooh.
whatever else Aaron wants to talk about there.
Well, I was just looking at our agenda here on my phone since I'm on the computer. We try to highlight a unique injury every week, right? Like something that somebody may not either be familiar with or why something, is different. We like to talk about what we're high and low on for the week, and sometimes that goes into pop culture. Sometimes that has something to do with sports medicine. And we do take a mailbag of listener questions and comments and fun stories, all anonymous, of course, because sometimes we just can't say things. to protect people.
Very nice.
So it's a little bit of a variety show. We call it edutainment. So a little bit of education, a little bit of entertainment.
Awesome
Thanks.
stuff. Guys, thanks so much. Aaron Borgmann, former Eagles athletic trainer. It's now Borgmann Rehab Solutions. And of course, Evan Kraft, who's with the Chiefs for a long time. Milestone Rehab, is it? Milestone Physical Therapy,
Milestone
correct?
Physical Therapy. Yep.
And of course, you got to catch the Sports Med Bros podcast every week. I'm sure available on every podcast platform and really wonk out on all the injuries in the NFL. Good stuff, guys. Really appreciate you
Yes.
joining us on this edition of Inside the Birds. Thanks again.
Thanks so much
Thanks.
for having us.
Thank you.